Hey everyone, it's Justin here, America's Honest Tax Accountant from Number Crunch Nerds. So here's the quiz question of the day. At 68 years old, the Jerome family came up with an idea. After the age of 73, they said, we don't want to pay taxes ever again. So the Jerome family looked at the Roth IRA conversion timeline, and they decided that for the 5-year period between age 68 and age 73, they were going to convert all, that is right, all of their traditional IRAs over to Roth. So if we take a quick look right here at the Roth IRA conversion timeline, this is going to be the Jerome family's 5-year conversion window, right here between the age of about 68 years old and right here at about the age of 73 years old. And by completing their plan of converting all of their traditional IRA balances over to Roth, they will avoid RMD territory completely. And so here's exactly what the Jerome family did. Number one, they converted their combined $3 million of traditional IRAs over to Roth at the ages of 68, 69, 70, 71, and 72. Number two, they pushed off the start of Social Security to age 70. And when they did start to collect, their combined benefit for the first year was $45,000. Okay, number three, starting at age 73 and going through their passing at age 93, the Jerome family lived exclusively off of number one, Roth IRA distributions, and number two, Social Security. Therefore, their taxable income was zero and the tax they paid was zero over this entire 20-year time period. Remember that if the only income you have is Social Security, then it will not be subject to tax. Social Security only becomes a taxable item due to the existence of other types of income. However, in this example, the Jerome family doesn't have any other types of income because all of the cash they are living on is coming from Roth IRA distributions. Okay, for purposes of this problem, let's assume the following. Number one, an annual 3.5% Social Security growth rate. Number two, an annual 2.5% growth rate in the after-tax cash flow needs of the Jerome family. And number three, a 3% portfolio rate of return in their Roth IRA. Let's further assume that their after-tax cash flow needs starting at age 68, which is when the example begins, that's going to be $125,000 for the first year when they are age 68. And then, of course, we will apply that 2.5% growth rate in their after-tax cash flow needs on a going forward basis after the first year. Also, for mathematical simplicity, let's hold item A, the tax brackets, item B, the tax rates, and item C, the standard deduction, constant at the 2025 levels for the entirety of this example. For those of you in the personal tax planning template program, you know that's where we will handle all of the inflation adjustments related to these items. Okay, now, considering only the information provided in the problem, the question I have for you is, did the Jerome family maximize their lifetime after-tax cash flow by following the tax planning strategy that has been laid out above? Okay, let's get started with the Jerome family tax planning example. By the way, for members of the personal tax planning template program, I am going to upload both this planning example right here, as well as this alternative scenario plan over here. We are going to walk through both of these in detail right now in this video. However, I'm going to upload the tabs so that those of you who want to click through these examples at your own pace will have the ability to do so. As you may have noticed, we are making a big push on the channel to distinguish between taxable income and after-tax cash flow. These are two separate measurements which you have to be able to distinguish between and calculate for yourself if you want to appropriately plan for the future and maximize the after-tax net worth for your family. So let's get started right up here with the plan that the Jerome family laid out on the previous tab. If you recall, we are going to start the example at age 68 and we are going to go out to age 93, but just for fun, I'm going to throw in 2 more years as cushion, because when we lay out our overall lifetime financial plans, you're not going to want to plan right up until the year you actually think you might pass. You want to determine some sort of residual value that will either be passed on to your beneficiaries or will act as a cushion should you outlive your original plan. So again, we're going to go from 68 to 95 right here. As far as starting the collection of Social Security, I mentioned that the Jerome family is going to push that out to age 70. And when the collection starts, the first year will be $45,000 combined. You may notice that for simplicity, we are assuming that both individuals of the Jerome family are the same age. And so they will both start collecting at the same time at age 70. Then if we go down to the next cell right here, you can see that I have applied a growth rate of 3.5% to the previous year's value, and that is going to be consistent all the way down the list, all the way to the final year at age 95. In addition, regarding the annual after-tax cash flow required by the Jerome family, which I'm just going to refer to as their annual living expenses, this is the amount of money they need after tax to cover their expenses. We're going to start that out at $125,000. And then if I go to the next cell right here, you can see we have applied a 2.5% growth rate, and that is going to continue in the same manner as it was with the Social Security all the way down here to age 95. Okay, the next thing I want to do is jump over here to the family's traditional IRA. Now, as you know from the personal tax planning template program, we do have 2 separate tabs for your Roth IRA conversion strategy within the program, because everything related to IRAs needs to be tracked on an individual basis, even if you file married filing joint. However, for simplicity in this example, we're just going to combine the values into one. And as we said before, the opening balance for the family's traditional IRA when the couple is 68 years old is going to be $3 million. Okay, in the next column right here, I have the amount of distribution that the couple would need to cover their living expenses coming out of the traditional IRA. Remember that for the first 5 years between 68 and 72, there's not going to be any money in the Roth IRA other than what we are converting pre-age 73. So for the first 5 years, we're going to cover living expenses with distributions out of the traditional IRA. Now, right here in this third column, I have the amount of living expenses that is going to be covered by Social Security for the first 5 years. As you can see, this is 0, 0, 45, 46, 48, and that will agree to this list over here of the gross distribution for Social Security. Now, let's be completely clear right here. I am not saying that this amount of Social Security income is coming coming out of the traditional IRA. What I am saying is that this is the grand total amount of after-tax cash flow that they need to cover living expenses in the first 5 years. That agrees to the first 5 numbers on this list over here, by the way. But because in these 3 years they are actually collecting Social Security, the net amount of distribution from the traditional IRA that will be needed to cover living expenses is going to decrease by the amount that is already covered by Social Security in those 3 years. So in the first 2 years, the gross amount needed will be the same as the amount distributed. However, in these 3 years right here, the gross amount needed will be reduced by the amount already covered by Social Security to arrive at this net amount of distribution to cover living expenses right here. Okay, so if we scroll over so we can see the entirety of the traditional IRA section of this spreadsheet, you're going to see in the next column right here is going to be the amount of Roth conversion that the couple will complete for that 5-year window that they have. Because remember, their goal is to get completely into Roth before they hit RMD territory, so that they will never be subject to tax again by following this strategy. Okay, so for purposes of this example and considering the distribution for living expenses that they're already taking and considering the rate of return that we have over here, in order to get roughly an even Roth conversion over the 5 years, I just determined that an amount of about $530,000 would do it. There was a little bit left over here, $9,956 in the final year. But these are the amounts of conversion that are necessary, again, considering these distributions already plus the rate of return. These are the amounts of distribution that will get the final balance, the ending balance in the traditional IRA to be 0 at the end of the 5-year period. And again, that's the goal of the Jerome family, because before they turn 73, they want to be completely in Roth. Right, so let's just make sure we know how the rest of this chart is working. The balance after distribution is going to be the opening balance for any particular year over here. And then we're going to subtract off that net distribution for living expenses, and we're also going to subtract off the Roth conversion. Note right here that this is like a side calculation within the greater calculation, where I'm simply taking the gross amount of living expenses that they have and subtracting off the part covered by Social Security. So this column again is the net amount, and that is why this balance after distribution subtracts this number right here as opposed to this number over here. Okay, moving along, many of you have seen this part before. There's our 3% annual rate of return. There is the growth in our portfolio, the balance after the distribution multiplied by the rate. And then if we go to this ending balance line right here, this is going to be the balance after distribution increased by the portfolio growth. And then, as many of you are familiar with, this ending balance for year 1 will become the beginning balance for year 2. And so each row within the traditional IRA works the same way as we just went over, and at the end of the 5-year period, we now have a balance of 0, and they are completely out of the traditional IRA. Okay, the next item I want to cover is taxable income, and the couple will have taxable income for the 5 years between age 68 and 72. The couple will not have taxable income starting at age 73 and forward, because again, the only sources of income that they are going to have in this scenario is going to be Roth IRA distributions, which as you know are not taxable, and also Social Security, which is not going to be a taxable item if there is no other income to cause it to be taxable. So for this first example, we're only going to have taxable income calculated for these 5 years. We will look at an alternative over here on this tab when we get to that part of the video. But for now, let's keep going up here with the taxable income calculation. So the first item is going to be Social Security. That is going to be taxed at a maximum of 85% of the gross distribution. So if you look over here, these are the gross distributions for the 3 years in question. And if you look in this cell right here, for example, you can see that this number is being multiplied by 85%. That is the same thing over here in these two. And so those numbers will represent the taxable amount of Social Security in those years. Then in the next row, we're going to have our traditional IRA distribution that is not the Roth conversion. That is going to be these 5 numbers that we went over right here from 125 down to this 89. You can see that same 125 through that 89 right here. That is taxable income. It's a traditional IRA distribution. And then after that, we're going to have our Roth conversion income, which is the $530,000 for the first 4 years, and then $539,956 for the final year. Just as a reminder, those are the numbers that came from right over here when we were determining the amount of Roth conversion that was needed to get that traditional IRA balance to zero at the end of the 5-year period. So as you know, Roth IRA conversions are taxable income, so that's where those numbers come from. And then finally, we have our standard deduction. This amount right here is just going to be the 2025 number adjusted for 2 people that are over the age of 65. We are going to ignore the OBA senior bump because the amount of income here is going to phase that out completely for this example. And of course, there's no guarantee that the OBA senior bump will continue beyond the next 4 years, so we're not going to plan for that. Okay, so Social Security plus our traditional IRA distribution plus our Roth IRA conversion less our standard deduction will give us our taxable income for each of these 5 years. Okay, going down here to the tax calculation, we are going to hold the rates and brackets constant. These are for married filing joint. These are for 2025. We're just going to hold them constant for all years as we are holding the standard deduction constant for all years. And as I mentioned before, we're just doing that for mathematical simplicity. When we do our full calculations, of course, we will be doing those inside the personal tax planning template, which can handle adjusting all of these items for inflation on a going forward basis. Okay, we're just going to run through one column of the tax calculation because it is going to work the same in all columns. Starting right here, the first $23,850 is multiplied by the 10% rate. In the next row right here, we have the top of the second bracket, which is $96,950, subtracting off the top of the previous bracket, and the difference is multiplied by 12%. In the next row, we have the top of the 22% bracket minus the top of the 12% bracket, and the difference is multiplied by 22%. That process is going to continue right here for the 24% bracket. That process is going to continue right here for the 32% bracket. And then the only difference right here in the 35% bracket is we are not taking the top of the 35% bracket because we don't actually have that much income. In this example, we have $619,500 for this particular year. So we are going to take the amount of taxable income that we actually have. We're going to subtract off the top of the previous bracket, and the difference will be multiplied by 35%. In this example, we have no tax in the 37% bracket. And then so right here, the total tax is just going to be the sum of all of these items right here. And these 5 amounts right here are going to be the amount of tax that the Jerome family will be subject to for each of the 5 years in order to complete these Roth IRA conversions and get themselves out of traditional completely and into Roth. Okay, now before we go down here to the after-tax cash flow analysis, I want to scroll over to the right. And what we're going to find over here is the family's Roth IRA. So the beginning balance at age 68 will be 0 for this example. Here are the conversion amounts coming out of the traditional and going into the Roth. There's the 530 all the way down to the 539. That is just the opposite of these numbers right here. The money is moving from traditional into Roth. Now, here is the point that I really want to make sure is clear so there's no misunderstanding. During the first 5 years of these conversions, the Jerome family is going to take money from the conversion itself in order to pay the tax. So in reality, this $530,000 is not going to end up in the Roth. What will end up in the Roth is $530,000 less all of the taxes that were due not only on the conversion, but all of the taxes that were due for the year. That's how we're going to handle the taxes in the first 5 years of this example, because the couple doesn't have any other source of income. If we go right back over here to the taxable income calculation, the only source of income is money coming out of the traditional in the form of a regular distribution and money coming out of the traditional in the form of a Roth IRA conversion. So the tax that is due on all of this has to be paid from somewhere, and we're going to pay it out of the traditional IRA in the form of withholding, basically. So again, going right down here to this full amount of tax for the year, $155,920, we are going to set it up such that the couple withheld, as part of their conversion, their broker withheld $155,920. So that amount did not actually end up in the Roth. What ended up there was $530 less that amount, or if we click right here, $374,081. Okay, so then we're going to take our balance after the conversion. We're going to apply our 3% rate of return. There is our portfolio growth for the first year. Everything related to distributions for living expenses was handled out of the traditional IRA for the first 5 years. So that will be not applicable for this section right there. And then if we click on this ending balance right here, you can see that it is the balance after conversion plus the portfolio growth, and then it's going to be less the distribution from the Roth that is needed to cover living expenses. Again, that won't be applicable to the first 5 years, but it will be applicable starting down here. And then once again, the ending balance becomes the beginning balance of the subsequent year. We have the next conversion. We take away the taxes. There's the balance after conversion, which of course is the starting balance plus the conversion less the withholding that we did to cover the taxes. And then the rest of the first 5 years here in the Roth is all going to work the same way. And then after the first 5 years is up, the only difference is going to be the handling of these living expenses, but the concept will be the same as we looked at before in the traditional IRA. For example, this $141,426, again, that's the $141,426 of required after-tax cash flow that the family needs off of our original list. From that, we are going to follow the same process of subtracting off the amount that is received in Social Security, because if we have $49,000 of cash flow being covered by Social Security, we don't need to take a distribution from the Roth IRA for that amount. So now going back over here, that's exactly what you're going to see. 141 is what they need to live on, but they're getting 49 gross off the Social Security. That Social Security, by the way, is not subject to tax anymore because there is no other taxable income causing it to be taxed in this example. So the difference between these two numbers is going to be this 91,534. That is the amount of distribution that the family will need from the Roth IRA in order to actually get up to this required amount of after-tax cash flow needed. And so when we go over here to the ending balance one more time, it's going to be the balance after conversion plus the portfolio growth for the year less the amount of distribution that is actually needed for the year from the Roth IRA. And that's how we're going to get this ending balance. And when we follow that through all the way to age 95, you will see that the ending residual value, in other words, the after-tax value that remains here in the Roth to be passed to the couple's beneficiaries, is going to be about $450,000 in this example. Okay, now let's run through the after-tax cash flow real quick, and then we will go down to the reconciliations where everything is going to come together. So for our after-tax cash flow in the first 5 years, we have our gross Social Security. Remember, the amount of taxable Social Security is not going to be the same as the after-tax cash flow. After-tax cash flow is just going to be the gross amount. It doesn't matter that only 85% of it was taxable. So you can see the gross amount of Social Security received, the actual cash received is right there, and that's what's going to go into these lines right here. The next item up is going to be our traditional IRA distribution. Those 5 numbers again are the same as right here. This is cash being distributed from the traditional IRA for purposes of living on it. And then in the first 5 years, we're not going to subtract off any tax right here because remember, the tax is being handled through withholding from the money that is coming out of the traditional IRA, and it is simply reducing the amount that goes into the Roth. And therefore, when we add up these two numbers right here, we get the total amount of after-tax cash flow. And these two lines that follow are a double check. This is the amount of after-tax cash flow that is required based on our original list right here. This is the amount that we actually got right here in the line above, and therefore the excess or deficit is 0. Okay, now let's come down here to the reconciliations where this entire example is going to come together. The first item is the couple's after-tax cash flow between the age of 68 and 72. If I click on this $657,000, you can see it comes from right here, the numbers we just went over, the total after-tax cash flow for that 5-year period. The next item is going to be the after-tax cash flow between age 73 and 95 that relates to Social Security. And if I double click on this 1.7 million right here, you can see it's simply the sum of the gross Social Security for this time period right here. The next item on the list will be the after-tax cash flow between the age of 73 and 95 related to Roth distributions. If I double click on this 2.6 million right here, and then we scroll over to the Roth IRA, you can see it's this amount, all of the items that were distributed from the Roth IRA for purposes of covering the living expenses. And then the final item on the list is going to be the after-tax residual value in the Roth IRA. That's $451,000. And if you recall, we saw that number right over here. So if we come back over here and add up those 4 after-tax cash flow items, the grand total after-tax value in this scenario is $5,434,073. Now I want to perform the reconciliation a second way because sometimes it's easier to understand it looking at the after-tax cash flow values here, but sometimes it's easier to understand it when we look at these overall values that were used within the problem. So in reconciliation number 2, the original IRA balance was $3 million. gross Social Security received, meaning for the entire time period. If I double click on that, that is just all of the items over here. That total is 1.8 million. Now, if I click on this item right here, the portfolio growth in the traditional IRA, we're going to see that that is the sum of the portfolio growth column right here in the traditional IRA section. If I double click right here on the portfolio growth in the Roth IRA, you will see that comes from the portfolio growth section over here in the Roth. And then finally, if I click on the total taxes paid of $786,000, those are the 5 numbers that we calculated right here related to all of the conversions, all of the distributions, and so on. And the grand total of these 5 items right here is going to be our $5,434,073. So the quiz question that we had at the beginning of this video for the Jerome family was, is this the most optimized result for after-tax cash flow that the Jerome family could have achieved under the fact pattern presented? And the only way to know if that is a good or a bad result is to compare it to something else. After all, there is no good or bad in tax planning. It's only good or bad for your specific facts and circumstances. So now what we're going to do is remember this 5.4 million, and then we're going to go over to this alternative scenario planning right here and see if using the same fact pattern that was just presented for the Jerome family, can we come up with a result that produces a greater after-tax cash value based on doing our tax planning in an alternative way. All right, everyone, due to the length of this video, I am going to put the deep dive explanation on the alternative scenario planning into the members area for the personal tax planning template program. However, real briefly, just scrolling down here to the reconciliations for this example, I want you to see that we are going to optimize this planning up to the tune of 5.8 million. That is up from about 5.4 million in the Jerome family's original tax plan. So we're going to figure out how to generate that $400,000 difference with no new facts being added to the scenario. It's simply going to be a change in how we deal with our conversions, how we deal with our RMDs, and how we take advantage of the graduated tax brackets in a way that minimizes our lifetime tax burden and maximizes the after-tax cash flow that remains in our family's pocketbooks. My personal tax planning template program is arguably the most comprehensive and complete individual income tax training program on the market in the United States today. Take a look at some of these recent comments by members of the program. Justin, your videos are so detailed and understandable. Thank you for helping us primarily old school retirees. And over here, thanks again for all your hard work and excellent education material. It is helping me to no end figuring out our future retirement taxes, Roth conversion, and trying different distribution strategies. And right down here, Justin, your spreadsheet is amazing, as is all of the work you've put into the videos within the members area of the personal tax planning template. It's like having a financial advisor report whenever I want for whatever changes happen or that I want to model. And then finally, right over here, Justin, I wish I had paid more attention to the tax implications of retirement when I hit 60, and I have encouraged others to learn from my mistakes. I'm now turning 73 this year and am facing large RMDs. As I said, you can join the personal tax planning template program with lifetime access for a one-time access fee at the link in the description below this video. And that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time.